Tom Farrell, and I'm a business lawyer, but I have a confession to make. When I was working as general counsel for a manufacturer out of Suffolk County, I had some responsibility for health and safety work, so I'm a little bit familiar with some of the OSHA regulations. And I picked this one. It's 29 CFR 1910-95. It's not the construction standard, it's general industry. It's about protection against the effects of noise exposure and hearing conservation or hearing protection programs. And why I picked that I'll tell you why. If there's an accident on a man lift or a scissor lift, that falls off the roof, you can see what the damage is. If there's an accident because somebody's jewelry or hair gets caught into a machine and they get pulled with the machine, you can see what the damage is. When the loss or damage occurs in very small increments over a course of years, sometimes 8, 10, 15 years, it's easy to not see that. It's easy for that not to be apparent. And that's what hearing loss is like. You get a guy that starts in a noisy environment at 24, 25 years old, and you try to tell him, you gotta wear your earmuffs, you gotta wear your ear protection devices, because when you're 39 or 40, you're gonna wake up and have hearing loss. They don't wanna hear it. Guys just don't wanna hear it because it's not immediate. So OSHA has this standard that has to do with protection against the effects of noise exposure. They've got this neat little chart that guys like Sherman and his spec writing colleagues come up with, and then they explain in this language underneath. It says, octave band sound pressure levels may be converted to the equivalent A-weighted sound level by plotting them on this. Complain about lawyers, you've got something wrong. What it means is, if your workplace is loud, you need a hearing conservation program. When employees are subject to sound exceeding the levels, you have to try administrative or engineering controls first, and that's why I wanted to come up after this gentleman talked about PPE. The initial reaction is, all right, if it's loud, I got to put on earmuffs. The protection program is supposed to start before that. They're supposed to start with administrative or engineering controls. An example of an administrative control is if you've got a room that you know is going to be noisy all the time because there's a grinder in it, or a sifter rather, you have to cross-train your employees so you don't have the same person in that room all day, day after day after day. You can rotate people in and out so that their exposure to the noise is minimized. You have to try engineering solutions first, which means that when you're building the plant, you have to find out if there are acoustical dampening materials that you can use instead of regular cinder blocks. You can try to place the machines as far from the walls as you can, because the closer the noise source is to the wall, the more it echoes and reverberates, and so it compounds the problem. Even after the building is done though and the machines are placed, you can use engineering solutions like this. This is a sheet by a company called Roxwell. I'm going to pass this around. They make insulating materials that are also sound dampening materials, so you can kill two birds with one stone. If you've got fire hazards and noise hazards in the same place, you put this material up and it absorbs some of the sound, and it also dampens fire. It absorbs heat, so you're less likely to get combustion. It's not that expensive either. It's not too bad. Okay, so now a big essential part of a noise protection program is monitoring, which means you have to give your employees audiograms. I suggest that every new employee get a baseline audiogram, because the key component to a hearing protection program is taking the baseline audiogram, and then when you do it every year, you compare the annual audiogram to the baseline. Because what that means is if there is even a slight hearing loss, it's going to show up on the annual. They call it the standard threshold shift, is that right?
It's the threshold.
Threshold shift, okay. What it means is the audiogram measures an employee's hearing in two different ways. It measures at different frequencies and also at volume. So once you get the baseline, when you look at it again 5 years later, 10 years later, you can see that at the low baseline frequency, where an employee used to be able to hear it at 30 decibels, and now we can only hear it at 33 or 34, you've already got a small hearing loss. In the higher frequencies, the losses tend to occur more quickly. The high sounds, the employee started out with a 30 decibel hearing level. Now we can only hear it when it's 37 or 38 or 40. That's a more significant hearing loss. And now you have to make adjustments to that person's schedule, to the equipment that is wearing, et cetera, et cetera. I chose hearing loss because it's kind of like high blood pressure. They call high blood pressure the silent killer because you don't see the damage that's being done. And that's the way I feel about hearing loss. Any questions?
Yeah, that's an excellent job, Tom. I see you went into the thresholds, the hearing thresholds, the decibel thresholds.
Yes.
And then the time-weighted average.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And your time-weighted average, how far? I see you went deep, and you cut yourself off.
Yeah.
I can see it. So in your time-weighted average, what did you gain from that? From threshold to the time-weighted average, what did you get out of that?
What I found, time-weighted average means that instead of just taking a reading at one time, an employee is fitted with a device that records, that measures and records the sound levels in the areas where they're working. And what that can show you is that the noise level exposure is this much in room A, and this much in room B, and this much in room C. So that if there's a problem in room A, when you're working on rotating people in and out, you know what other places to put them. Room A may be noisiest at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning when the shift first starts, because that's when the machine is warming up, and that's when just sometimes the kind of material you're putting into the machine. And that's, again, what a time-weighted average does. Instead of just taking 1 or 2 readings, the readings are spread over a period of time, usually an 8-hour day, so you can spot the times and the rooms that are the noisiest and react accordingly. Did I get that right?
And when you went into the rotation, that removes Yusef from that room for a period of time. And that's also consistent with your time-weighted average. So you're not exposed to it for an 8-hour period when it starts to affect you even more after that. So instead of being there for 8 hours, you're there for 2 hours, and then Will is there for another hour, and so on. It's rotated. But that's an excellent job. I like the research.
My name is Fitzmaurice Charlson. I'm living in July. I got home really late last night. I didn't have a chance to put it together, but I went to the website, to OSHA website. I was looking at, reading some article, and that one came with my attention about back over and hazard on site.
You have to speak up.
About back over incident on site when they have delivery or heavy equipment, or people working with heavy equipment, and other workers are working, they don't pay attention to what's going on surrounding them, and that's why a lot of incidents happen. I was looking at from OSHA website, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they show that over 70 workers died from back off, from heavy equipment. They don't pay attention, nothing. Even why it got my attention while I'm driving, I always paying attention to all my surroundings. And even when you're walking on the street, especially in the city, people don't pay attention to what's going on. They think people driving, if somebody driving the car is different, so the car is different also, or nothing can happen. They just crossing the street without looking or looking on the phone. That's created a lot of problems. Okay. OSHA came with some new regulation for heavy equipment that's working on the site. They can install some kind of devices to help monitoring cameras on those heavy equipment. They can see all surrounding while they are working. That's all.
Yeah, with that, he said, you know, getting struck by. He went into struck by. And what I like about that, he not only went into the struck by, you know, the equipment struck by, caught in between, things of that nature, but he went into the BLS, which we discussed yesterday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Yeah.
So in that, in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, he said it's 70%. It's 78% now. As of midday, every quarter the Bureau does their report, and they submit it at the end of the year. It's 78%. So you're right, you're just probably a year late.
Okay.
But in these equipments getting struck by, one of the things that always stand out to me, I'll never forget, it happened, we was doing a project in Ohio back in the 90s, and this person got hit, and he was in the swing radius of a crane, a 777. And just imagine someone hitting you with a building. That's what that weight is. He was hit, he was literally, and he was just not struck, like just swept through. He was just tapped. And he was knocked 35 feet. He passed, you know, on site because his everything was just destroyed. His spinal cord, his neck, head. And he was hit, he was just tapped with the swing radius, and that's the boom. That's the back of the crane. So be aware of this. That swing radius you have to protect. If you're out there managing a project, make sure if that swing radius is here and we're swinging at 53 degrees, which is the average degrees that those cranes and the boom and the outrigger swings, it's at 53 degrees. Make sure there's 6 feet of protection there that no one can walk into that swing radius. This guy, we was walking up on the site and we seen it. That was the sad part about it. We was there just to start the regulations, and they had just assembled the crane, they had did their critical lift test, they had all the permits in place and everything, but they had no monitoring. They had no crane director that said this is how it's going to go before we start moving this crane on this pad. They had the timber mats down, they had the security in the front and the back. It couldn't tip over, it couldn't be blown over or anything, but they did that one thing wrong. They didn't protect that area of operation. That swing radius, it's here. If you walk into that, it's a done deal. You get hit by any crane, you're talking about tons. It was a 777, so just imagine the crane itself is over 250 tons, and the swing radius have to counter that by 10 because of the load. Okay, the load, it has to hold the load, it has to hold the truck, it has to hold the swing. So you're talking about 4, 8, 12. You're talking about 250 tons on top of that ton, the 777 tonnage. So you keep that in mind. Keep them out of that radius. You don't want to get hit by any of that stuff. All right.
There's monitoring and walking around. Cars now, they've done something crazy now. With cameras that within the distance,
Yeah.
get an alert for the crane operator to know that there's something around.
Yeah.
If you pass into it's like infrared, as soon as you pass into that
Yeah.
sector,
It starts chirping and everything. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So excellent job, man. Make sure if you have two